Welcome back, fiber friends, to another episode of the Wooltogold podcast. My name is Brian. I am your host, and today we are talking soap. We're talking soap, washing, blocking, both yarn and finished objects, finished crochet and knitting. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, please stick around. Before we get any farther, don't forget to like, subscribe if you're new. I talk about all things yarn on this channel. A lot of the times it is hand spinning, but I love me some crochet. So if you're a crocheter, please feel free to stick around. Today is definitely going to be one of our more organized videos. To a lot of y'all's relief, I know some of you really like the how-to tutorial format. Some of you really like the vlogs. I'm trying to do a nice balance of both. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all of the soaps that I love to use for blocking and why, sort of my ranking system for all of them, and then we are also going to talk about how I wash my handspun yarn, why we wash handspun yarn, the different ways that you can finish handspun yarn, and then we're going to do the same thing for crochet finished objects as well. I say crochet finished objects because it has been a very long time since I have had to finish a knit. Okay, do I know how to knit? Yes. Do I knit? No, and I really don't relish the opportunity. I'm going to be so honest with you guys, and I think that that's okay. I think we need to normalize in fiber arts that it's all right to say, you know what? I'm not a fan of something. I don't get offended when people don't like washing whole sheet fleeces or even don't like spinning at all. In fact, I feel like as somebody who loves the hobby more than anybody else also understands its flaws and pitfalls and how it's not for everybody. And so in the same way, I hope we can all respect that not all fiber arts are for everybody. And you know what? Knitting is just not for me, and that's okay. But let's talk about soaps first, because I feel like that's the one that people always like to hear about. People see my little soap collection, and a lot of people wonder, why do you have so many soaps? Do you need that many soaps? I use a lot of soap. I finish a lot of objects, both finished yarn and finished crochet objects, and so I need a lot of soap. And I also wash fleeces, which can benefit from using a different kind of soap than the kind of soap that you would use to finish like cashmere or alpaca mittens that you just made. So why do we wash and finish garments? There's a lot of reasons. I feel like the main reason that people highlight is that it makes your finished object look more finished, more professional. That is absolutely true, okay? That is a lot of it. A lot of it is the fact that most objects look a lot cleaner and a lot more finished once they're washed, but there's so many other reasons that you should be washing your finished objects, okay? First, you've touched every centimeter of that object. Every single centimeter of that yarn, whether you're spinning it or working it into something knitted or woven, you've touched essentially every bit of it, and you need to wash it now, because even if you're washing your hands before you start working on every single project, inevitably you're just gonna get finger oils and a little bit of hand sweat on the project, and so it's just a good idea to wash it. Especially if you're like me and you like to bring your projects lots of different places, you should probably wash your finished object. And then arguably, in my opinion, one of the most important reasons, and the reason I see skipped over the most for the reason that you should wash your finished object, is because inevitably, it's going to need to get wet. Inevitably, you're going to have to wash it. If you're wearing it at some point, you should be washing it, right? Whether it's an accessory or a piece of clothing. I feel like that's a little bit common sense, right? And we all know that when you wash something, whether it be handspun yarn or a crochet or woven or knitted object, it's going to change. It's going to shift a little bit. That's why we do swatch tests, right? I think alpaca, in my opinion, is one of the biggest offenders of looking one way once it's in the finished object and then getting it wet and it looking literally completely different. But there's lots of other fibers and yarns and even stitches that result in something looking really different after it's been wet, blocked out, as compared to before. And the thing about that is a lot of people will be like, oh, well, I know that something isn't going to look right once it's blocked out, so I'm just never going to wash and block it. You're never going to wash the sweater? You're never going to wash that scarf? I just think that that's a little impractical. I don't want to come off as shamey or preachy, but also you should be washing your clothes. If nobody has told you this yet, if you are between the ages of 16 to 23 and you have not been told yet that you should wash all of your clothes at least once or twice a year, depending on how much you use the garment and, and, you know, the material type of the garment. I know that these things can be scary to learn how to do, but I'm here to help you, okay? Because besides talking about the types of soaps I'm going to use today, I'm also going to talk about like the methodology and how I don't felt things, okay? Because I know when washing a lot of these things, that's what a lot of people are worried about too. Besides it blocking out to be really weird or wonky, which again, you can prevent with a swatch test. I'm just putting it out there. There's also the factor that people are like, no, I know that it's going to block out fine. It's just that I'm afraid of felting it. As promised, let's start with soap. Let's talk about it, okay? I have a lot of different soaps here. I do want to remind you that I have been crocheting for like 5 years now. I've been spinning my own yarn for 3. I wash my own fleeces. I use a lot of soap. Something like this bottle of Unicorn Power Scour is not even going to last me an entire year with how many fleeces I wash and process and spin myself and also sell to other people. If you've been here for a long time, you know I do all of these things, right? And that's really what Unicorn Power Scour is good for, okay? It's good for washing fleeces. A lot of these soaps are specifically good at certain things and certain categories within this larger category of washing and blocking. And so I'm going to talk about that today, but I do want to remind you all that, like, I know some of the best spinners I know are people that still only wash their fleeces with Dawn dish soap, and you can have your feelings and opinions on that, but at the end of the day, if you don't have access or funds to buy something like this, that's totally fine. You can also use Dawn dish soap. I've talked about that in a lot of my scouring videos. If you want to finish your garment and it to have something like have a nice smell, like something like this, you can just use the detergent that you have at home. But let's talk about the details. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Why do I have so many soaps? So I was talking about Unicorn Power Scour before, so this is the one that we're going to start with. This is my favorite soap. Full stop. Every time I smell this, it sends me back to one of the first times I ever successfully washed a sheet fleece, and I love Unicorn Power Scour. You don't need much to go a very long way, okay? I think it's like 1 tablespoon is recommended for every 2 gallons of hot water. So I don't know if I've actually noticed this before, but it does have different instructions for if you're using this to finish or hand wash a garment. Obviously, this can be used to hand wash a garment. It's just not my favorite because at the end of the day, Power Scour specifically is used to scour sheet fleeces, right? On the back, it has recommendations for the hand wash, which is, I think it's half tablespoon Power Scour per gallon of hot water. And then to scour a fleece, it recommends 1 tablespoon of Power Scour for every 2 gallons of hot water. I love this stuff. It gets the job done. It gets things cleaner than I can get them with really any other soap. There is no doubt that this is worth every penny. And if you're someone who's not scouring like multiple fleeces every year and finishing like a ton of crochet projects and a ton of hand spun yarn, 1 bottle of this is gonna last you absolutely forever. So use it sparingly, enjoy it. It's a real powerhouse, and it does what the name suggests, right? It scours, it cuts through grease. So if you are working with a farm yarn with like a touch of lanolin left in it and you don't want that lanolin to go away, maybe don't use the Power Scour, right? Because this stuff really gets the job done. It's like Dawn dish soap on steroids. And it smells better, at least in my opinion. Next up is the newest contender in my bunch. This is Soak. This is the fig scent, which is one of my favorites. I also really love the celebration scent, but I don't really buy more than 1 bottle at a time because, as you can see, I go through this a lot slower than I do the Power Scour because I really only use this to finish garments. So I don't think I would use this to scour. I don't think I would use either of these soaps to scour, frankly, because they're intended to be a lot more gentle. In the case of Eucalan, there's actually a little bit of lanolin in this because lanolin is good for the maintenance of like wools and cashmeres and things like that. It also helps aid in like the antibacterial factor of a lot of these fibers, and so it helps keep like stink away in general. But I digress. Let's talk about Soak, okay? Soak is newer to me. I think it's newer to the hand wash scene in general. I think that Eucalan is an older company, but what I do love about Soak is all of their scents are good. Even the scents that aren't my favorite are still really like mild and approachable enough. They're not, maybe not mild isn't the right word, right? Because they have some lasting power. All of the scents are really delicious and they have a lot of lasting power, but they're not like harsh and aggressive and offensive to the nose. So again, if you don't really like the scent, I think there's only 1 or 2 scents of theirs that I'm not a huge fan of. One of them is their citrus. I don't really like their citrus scent. It's a little too grapefruit heavy for me. That's okay. But again, Celebration is great. I really like, they have like a delicate, like fancy scent that's actually surprisingly enjoyable. I thought I wouldn't like it because it's supposed to be very floral heavy, but I enjoyed it. And then they have like a wild mint scent, I believe, that I would also like to get my hands on. I really like soap though. It's great for finishing any sort of like crochet or knit garment. Whenever people receive a gift that's been washed in this, they're always like, oh my gosh, it smells so good. So if you're gonna gift something to somebody, I highly recommend soap. I know for a fact that they offer an unscented version, which is very, very popular with those who really enjoy the unscented version of things in general. People say that their unscented soap is really good, but I do believe that they have a lavender scent as well for those of you who tend to wash your stuff in lavender to help prevent like moth or bug damage. The last soap that I'm going to talk about today, mind you, there are hundreds of other soaps, okay? If you want to leave your favorite below, please do. I don't know when the next time I'm going to pick up new soap is. Probably fairly soon, because this bottle of Eucalan is definitely on its last legs, I will admit. Eucalan is the last soap that we're going to talk about today. This is my bottle of Eucalan. This is like the full size. They also make mini sizes. I had to give away both of the mini sizes that I had because I did not end up liking the scent. So this is what I'll say about Eucalan. The scent and the staying power of the scent is strong on whatever bottle you get, whether it's the grapefruit, the jasmine, the lavender scent, okay? It's going to, the object that you finish with that soap is going to smell that way for a while. So if you don't like the scent, be prepared for that. It's gonna have some lasting power, unfortunately. And again, the grapefruit and the jasmine did not work out for me, so I ended up having to give them to somebody else because I just couldn't handle having them in my collection. I would always be like, oh, are they as bad as I imagined? I would wash something in them and I'd be like, oh my gosh, they are as bad as I remembered. And so I just got rid of them. I gave them to somebody else who would use them. But this is the lavender scent. I think the lavender and the unscented are probably my favorite of the Eucalan. Eucalan wash has a little bit of lanolin in it, which is really good for the maintenance of a lot of wool and like animal fiber based finished objects in general. You can even see on the bottle it says lanolin enriched laundry detergent, and it also has lavender oil in it. Another thing that I didn't mention about all of these soaps is that technically they're no rinse. So if you don't get all of the soap off of the finished object, the yarn, the fiber that you're washing, it's not going to do long-term damage to the protein-based fiber. Whereas there is a lot of like debate and suggestion that certain soaps, especially harsher detergents, can over time, if not rinsed properly, do damage to the protein fiber. There's a lot of debate in the community as to how actually true a lot of these claims are. And at the end of the day, if you just properly rinse your fiber, you're not going to have a problem. But I'm kind of notorious for not always rinsing maybe as thoroughly as I could. Because I am overly worried about felting. And so I like that these soaps are, a lot of them will say like no rinse up in the corner. And that's what that means. If some of the soap ends up being left on the garment and not fully rinsed out, that it's not going to damage the garment at all. I really like Eucalan. It is a powerhouse. It is an older company. It is one of those things that people swear by. I like their lavender scent. I haven't had moths or bugs yet. And I've washed a lot of my things in this, so maybe this is part of the reason. I think in terms of affordability too, it's a little bit more affordable than Soak and Power Scour. I could be wrong about that though, and I think it probably depends on where you're sourcing it. So how do I use the soaps to finish my objects? First, we're going to talk about finishing yarn. I do want to preface this with the fact that I work with mostly protein animal fibers, okay? Wool, not as much alpaca because I'm a little bit allergic to alpaca, a lot of mohair up in this collection. So keep that in mind. That impacts my yarn finishing methodology. It would probably be a little different or a lot of different if I was working with certain fibers like silk or cotton. Usually what I do is put a small amount of soap in a large bowl and fill it up with super hot water, and then I gently submerge the yarn into the water and let it sit from anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes, okay? If this is a fiber that is hand dyed and I'm worried about the colors running, I'm gonna make that water closer to warm as opposed to hot, and I'm going to carefully watch it and check up on it at the 20-minute mark, because if I see the colors are already starting to run, I'll probably dump the water and not soak it for the whole 45 minutes to prevent the colors from running. Why do we soak it for such a long time? Okay, I think it's important that the water really permeates every single fiber, and you have to remember that when we twist the fiber together, both into the single plies and then twist those plies onto each other, we're almost making that yarn a little bit more resistant to water entering into those fibers. So the longer we give it to soak, the better of a chance that it's going to permeate every single fiber. Now, why do we want it to permeate every single fiber? Finishing handspun yarn is arguably more important than even finishing a crocheted or knit object, and I stand by that, because if you think the way that certain yarns can change from the way that they're crocheted and knit up originally to how the swatch looks after you've washed and blocked it, okay, the amount of change that a handspun yarn can go through from washing it is insane, especially if it is a wool base, and that wool is notorious for being really lofty. That yarn could end up looking a lot specifically larger than you expected after you wash and potentially thwack the yarn. Thwacking the yarn is when you essentially like beat the yarn against the ground. Highly recommend you add this to your finishing repertoire if you don't have it already. If you're finishing a yarn that you worry might be a little bit weak, I do think that thwacking can help fell or felt the yarn a little bit and add to the strength of the yarn. It also makes the yarn more even in general, so if you are worried about the evenness of your yarn, the consistency of your handspun singles, once you ply and wash and thwack them, the thwacking and the washing will actually help make those singles a lot more even. Don't judge your yarn before you have finished it, because again, handspun yarn can change drastically from the time that it is on the bobbin to the way that it looks afterward. And so that's why we wash it, because imagine if you took that handspun yarn and you just worked with it without washing it, without swatching it, and then you washed and blocked it. That finished garment, you have no idea what it's gonna look like. You have no idea what your fabric's gonna look like. If you're down with that, if you're down with that risk, I don't know, you're just like a different kind of artist than me. That's chill. I don't live on the edge like that. Finishing yarn also actually sets the twist, right? Because it is sort of like, it's hair, it's wool, it's fiber, and so when you get it wet and you let it dry, it kind of sets it in that shape, just like when you wet braids and you let them dry and then you take your hair out of the braid, right? It's kind of set in that shape, and we want that in yarn because it helps strengthen it, it helps keep it together. When you wash yarn, it also relaxes it. So if you take your handspun off of the nitty knotty and you hold it up and it's a little twisty at the bottom, and maybe you feel like it's a little bit over twisted, you really need to wash the yarn before you decide that it is over twisted, because it's going to relax and let go of some of that twist when you wash it. So what do I do once the yarn is done soaking? Let's say it's soaked for the whole 45 minutes. What I do is I drain my little container, leaving the yarn in it, right? I don't want to pick the yarn up out of that water, out of that container, just like I wouldn't take a wet piece of knitting and just lift it out of the water to bring it to a towel to dry it off, right? We don't want to do that because that's going to stretch the knit, it's going to stretch the handspun in a way that's a little bit too far, a little unnatural, and so it could potentially ruin the shape of the work that we've done. So what we want to do is we want to drain the water first. I like to gently squish the excess water out even more while it's still in. Usually a big metal bowl is what I use, but you can use whatever you got. Squish the excess water out and then tilt that and let that water out as well. At that point, I might lift the entire thing gently and carefully to a towel, lie it out nicely, and then roll the towel up completely, making a concerted effort to try to squish as much of that water out as possible. At this point, a lot of the times the garment has become significantly lighter, and I'm not as worried about it stretching out. And at this point, if it's yarn specifically, I'm going to hang it up to dry. Some people like to add weights at the end of their yarn, and I totally respect that. In fact, I wish that I was more consistent about weighing the bottom of my yarn, but I'll be so real with you guys, I rarely weigh down the bottom of my yarn. That's not really a practice that I tend to do, especially because my skeins are really heavy, and a lot of the times the bottom of them are like heavy enough to weigh themselves down. Maybe that's just a benefit of spinning on the wheel that I do. Once they're hung up to dry on, I'm gonna literally show you guys that thing. I bought this for $1 at a thrift store. I'm pretty sure it's from IKEA. I did get it stained with a little bit of natural dye the very first time I experimented with natural dyeing. That's what that little red stain is. But I still use it to dry yarn all the time. And that's where I dry it. I just hang it up to dry there. Lots of people, though, use, like, clothes hangers and things like that to dry it. That's also a pretty efficient method. And then I usually just, whenever I'm gone from my room, I leave my fan going so that it helps dry it a little bit faster. Now, what about for crochet finished objects? And I think this kind of goes similarly for knitted objects or woven objects. I do the same exact soaking process, the same like dumping the water out, squishing the excess water out, dumping the water out again, lying it out on a towel, rolling it up in a towel, squishing the water out from the towel. Okay, I do all of those same things, but then instead of hanging my finished crochet object up, because I don't want to just stretch the shoulders, right? If I hang it up and the bottom is heavy, it's going to, you know, on the hanger have some stretch in the shoulders. We've all had that accidentally happen before we really knew how to do laundry properly, right? So what do I do instead? I bring out the blocking mat and I bring out the knit blockers. Once all of the water is squeezed out of a project and I'm confident that, you know, I've gotten as much of the water out of it as I essentially can, it's time to put it on the blocking mat. This is my blocking mat, or I guess a piece of it. As you can see, it interlocks with other pieces in order to make like a really big mat if I need it. I have like 6, 7, 8 of these kind of just scattered around my room. And then I use these Knitter's Pride knit blockers to help me block everything out. I have never had the patience for that really tedious like T-pinning that some people do. I used to use T-pins for the first like I'd say 3 or 4 shawls that I crocheted, and I just decided like I'm so tired of this, grandpa, I'm not going to be doing this, and I invested in knit blockers. It saves me a lot of time. I will say I do not regret this purchase in the slightest. In fact, if I had the opportunity to purchase like another set of these slightly discounted because they were used or something like that, I would absolutely take that opportunity in like a heartbeat. The part that I kind of wanted to focus in on a little bit is the actual blocking mats. So as you can see, right, you can purchase blocking mats online, but if you do, they're going to be really expensive. I'm going to be totally transparent and tell you guys that I got these blocking mats for free. So if you know anybody in construction, maybe it's your dad, your partner, your sister's boyfriend's cousin, like whatever. If you work in construction, you're probably really familiar with these, right? If I flip it over, it has the texture that you're probably a little bit more familiar with. Sometimes these are used on sites for like a variety of PPE / like safety reasons to help give certain areas like a little bit more grip, as you can see. And then after the fact, these have to be technically disposed of because they can't be reused for another project. There's a ton of reasons and laws and things like that around why they can't be reused. Sometimes they can be reused, so it doesn't apply to every job site. So please don't go just like taking things that you shouldn't be, because that's not what I'm advocating for here. But what I am saying is maybe ask the construction worker in your life or the tradesman in your life if there are any of these sitting around that they might be able to bring home for you. You know, you can just start with one, and then when you need another one, you can ask for another one, and so on and so forth. You know, you don't have to get all 8 at once. I also dry fleece on these, which I know is not the most efficient option, right? If I had it my way, guys, I would have just like a big rack, literally bigger than the size of my mattress, just in the center of my living room with like a big mesh screen, and I would just dry all my fleece out in the open on that big mesh screen, and it would probably speed up the process a ton. But I don't have that liberty. I don't have that opportunity. At least not right now. I'm really working to get my own place. That's been something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I would like to live alone in like a studio apartment so that I can use any extra space that I have to make art, because that's what we're all trying to do, right? We're all trying to live our dream. We all have goals in mind for our lives. And I am getting closer and closer to a lot of them because of you guys. You guys have no idea how much like the engagement on social media really has like essentially changed my life. And I don't even full transparency, I really don't make that much from like the creator fund. I only just this month, as of this video being posted, was able to make it into like the YouTube version of that. I know it's not called the YouTube Creator Fund, but whatever that version of that, I just was able to activate it. It did take them like well over a month to finally approve that for whatever reason. And I'm not complaining in any regard. I am just saying though, like, you know, I'm being transparent. I don't make a ton of money from doing social media, and that's one of the reasons that I have kept my day job. I also like my day job. Controversial take. I like my day job, but I'll talk more about that in a future video. But still, that small amount has really made the difference and has made it slightly easier for me to achieve a lot of my goals with both my business and with moving out. So I really appreciate that. Thank you to everybody who continues to tune in. And yeah, I think that's all I really have to say about washing and blocking for now. I can totally do a video where I actually like show you the process of washing and blocking something. I just didn't have anything to wash or block right now, but I've had a lot of people requesting this video. There's a version of this video that I posted on TikTok and Instagram that did extremely well, that people were really enamored with. They wanted to know more about the soaps. And so I've been wanting to make a long form version of this for a while. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something. Again, if you have a favorite washing and blocking soap, please tell me down below. The specific scent and everything. I want details. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.